Have you ever stopped to consider the profound impact it would have if the very individuals you nurtured and raised turned their backs on you during your twilight years? Imagine dedicating decades of your life to your children, pouring your heart and soul into their upbringing, only to find yourself abandoned precisely when you need them the most. This narrative transcends mere tales of familial betrayal. It's an exploration of resilience, self-discovery, and confronting the stark truths that accompany aging. It's about navigating the intricate journey of maintaining one's dignity and self-worth when the support system you once relied upon falters. In this compelling video, you'll be introduced to the heartfelt story of Eleanor Thompson, a devoted mother who endured unimaginable hardships. From the deep-seated betrayal by her children to the agonizing choice of embracing solitude in her later years, Eleanor's journey is both harrowing and inspiring. As you delve into her story, you'll uncover the harsh realities she faced and the invaluable lessons she learned along the way. Discover why depending solely on your children in old age might not provide the security you anticipate, how to reclaim control over your life when all seems lost, and why diligently saving for your future can be the cornerstone of your happiness and peace of mind. Stay tuned until the very end to witness how Eleanor found inner strength amidst the most daunting circumstances. Her story serves as a beacon of hope and a practical guide, offering insights that can help you prepare for your future. This isn't just a narrative filled with family drama. It's a crucial message about the importance of independence, the power of resilience, and the true essence of familial bonds. Don't miss out. Taking the time to watch this could be a pivotal decision for your future self. If you haven't already, I highly encourage you to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell to ensure you never miss any of our insightful videos. Your support is invaluable and deeply appreciated. If this video resonates with you, please consider liking and sharing it. By doing so, you help us continue spreading these essential lessons, reaching more people who could benefit from Eleanor's story and the wisdom it imparts. First, speak less. The more parents talk, the easier they lose authority. An education expert once shared a case like this. In the realm of parenting, one crucial lesson stands out: speak less. The more parents talk, the easier it becomes for them to lose their authority. This principle isn't just a theory. It's backed by real-life experiences and expert insights. Consider the story shared by Dr. Emily Hart, an education specialist, who recounted a situation that perfectly illustrates this point. John Davis, a middle school student, was excited yet anxious about participating in his school's annual spring excursion to a national park. It was his first time being away from home for such an extended period, and naturally, his grandmother, Margaret Davis, was concerned. Before John left, Margaret couldn't help but voice her worries. She reminded him repeatedly about everything, from wearing the right clothes and packing his lunch to staying with his group and avoiding stray animals. Initially, John responded politely, acknowledging each of his grandmother's reminders with a few words. However, as Margaret continued her barrage of instructions for nearly 30 minutes, John's patience wore thin. Frustrated, he snapped, "Grandma, enough already. Have you said enough?" The hurt in Margaret's eyes as she stood there, feeling dismissed and lonely, left a lasting impression on Dr. Hart's friend, who felt that her son was being inconsiderate. This scenario highlights a common dilemma. Parents often speak out of love and concern, but their constant reminders can lead to unintended frustration and rebellion in children. Dr. Hart emphasized that the more parents talk without meaningful engagement, the less children respect their guidance. This can foster an environment where impatience and a rebellious attitude cause children to argue back and lose respect for their parents' authority. Adding to this perspective, a popular parenting blogger, Sarah Mitchell, shared her own struggles with excessive nagging. Sarah often found herself repeating the same instructions, like reminding her daughter, Lily, to complete her homework, clean her room, or prepare for her next school day. Despite her intentions stemming from love and concern, Lily grew increasingly irritated with each repeated reminder. Sarah noticed a stark contrast between her approach and that of her husband, Mark Mitchell. Mark preferred a more concise method of communication. On the day Lily was about to leave for college, she asked him, "Dad, do you have any advice for me?" Mark simply replied, "Take care of yourself and stay focused." Those few words carried significant weight for Lily, leaving a lasting impression that she deeply cherished. In essence, Professor Linda Thompson, a renowned psychologist, once stated, "Speaking too much can undermine your authority." This assertion underscores the idea that every word parents say without effectively educating their children only diminishes their authority in their eyes. When parental authority weakens, the natural respect between parents and children begins to fade. Therefore, when children show signs of disrespect or belittle their parents, the first step should be to control their speech. Let go of the tendency to preach incessantly to your children. Instead, lead by example. When your actions consistently earn the respect of others, children will naturally follow your lead without the need for excessive verbal reminders. Second, establish authority. In the world of parenting, one undeniable truth stands. The weaker the parents, the more children take over. When parents fail to assert their authority and set clear boundaries, it becomes much easier for children to disregard their authority and take control of the household dynamics. This principle is essential for maintaining respect and discipline within the family. I recently came across a heart-wrenching story that made me reflect on this dynamic. A young girl named Emily Thompson had been struggling with her grades, so her mother, Sarah Thompson, decided to enroll her in additional tutoring to help improve her performance. However, Emily was adamant about not attending the classes and refused to cooperate. Sarah, desperate for her daughter's success, resorted to pleading with Emily, but nothing worked. In a final, desperate attempt, Sarah even knelt in the middle of the street, begging her daughter to attend the extra lessons. Instead of feeling sympathy, Emily's response was cold and dismissive. "Even if you kneel here, I don't care," she shouted, walking away from her mother. It was a heartbreaking scene, one that left a deep impression on anyone who witnessed it. It serves as a powerful reminder of what happens when parents lose their authority. When parents compromise their authority, children are less likely to understand the value of respect. They may begin to disregard their parents' wishes and develop a sense of entitlement, where their needs and desires are placed above all else. The writer and philosopher, Dr. Margaret Wilson, once eloquently stated, "Loving someone means sometimes stepping back and allowing them to grow, but it should never mean sacrificing your sense of authority and respect." This is a lesson that rings true for parents everywhere. The more a parent allows their authority to be undermined, the more likely it is that children will begin to take them for granted, expecting everything to be handed to them without appreciation. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. It's important to recognize that parents are entrusted with the responsibility of guiding their children. If parents constantly lower themselves or abandon their role as leaders, children may begin to see them as mere providers or servants. They will stop valuing their parents as figures of wisdom and instead treat them as nothing more than people to be manipulated for their benefit. A valuable saying perfectly sums this up: parents who kneel will never raise strong children. To ensure that children grow up respecting and valuing their parents, it is crucial for parents to maintain their authority. They must uphold a level of respect and discipline so that their children understand boundaries and the importance of mutual respect. Enforcing discipline, a crucial step. Knowing when to enforce discipline is a critical part of parenting. For instance, when children behave unruly, show disrespect, or fail to follow basic manners, parents must take action. This is where consistency and firmness come into play. When you set boundaries, you must enforce them, regardless of the pushback you might receive. It's important to realize that discipline isn't about punishing children. It's about teaching them the importance of responsibility and respect for others. One example of effective discipline comes from a story shared by a father, Mark Harrison, who was dealing with his teenage daughter, Lily. Lily had become very entitled and rude, often expecting everything to go her way. She would shout at her parents if things weren't to her liking, and she began to disregard basic household rules. One evening, after Lily refused to come to dinner because she was watching TV, Mark decided it was time to teach her a lesson. Third, let go. One of the hardest lessons for parents to learn is this: the more parents do, the less their children know how to be satisfied. It's a paradox that lies at the heart of parenting. While parents believe they are expressing love by doing more and providing endlessly for their children, this overindulgence often leads to entitlement rather than gratitude. In her book Dare to Love, Dare to Let Go, psychologist Dr. Sophia Harper discusses this phenomenon with striking clarity. She explains that parents don't fail their children because they don't love them, but rather because they love them too much. This excessive care and indulgence can have unintended consequences, leaving children unprepared for life's realities. Over time, children come to expect everything to be handed to them, losing the ability to appreciate their parents' sacrifices. Take, for instance, the story of Madison Collins. a 23-year-old international student attending university in Spain. Her father, Robert Collins, worked tirelessly, earning $2,500 a month to provide for his daughter. Out of this modest income, Robert sent $2,000 each month to cover Madison's living expenses. Despite her father's sacrifices, Madison spent recklessly, purchasing only designer items and indulging in an extravagant lifestyle. When her funds ran out, she began using credit cards, accumulating debt she couldn't repay. When Robert discovered this, he gently advised Madison to manage her spending more wisely. However, instead of taking his advice to heart, Madison took to social media, publicly shaming her father. She posted screenshots of their conversations, calling him stingy and encouraging others to criticize him. Her most hurtful comment read, "If you can't afford to raise me, you shouldn't have had me." This heartbreaking example highlights the importance of letting go. Letting go doesn't mean ceasing to love your children. It means stepping back and allowing them to take responsibility for their own lives. By doing so, parents empower their children to understand life's hardships, appreciate the value of hard work, and develop gratitude for the sacrifices their parents have made. Only through independence can children truly grow into self-reliant, responsible adults. In The Art of Positive Parenting, Dr. Linda Thompson states, "Parents who do too much deprive their children of opportunities to develop their abilities. They create habits of dependence, where children see being served by their parents as natural and expected. When children lose respect for their parents, it's often because parents have unknowingly cultivated a dynamic where respect is no longer required." The real-life lesson: independence through responsibility. A personal story from my aunt, Elizabeth Johnson, perfectly illustrates this principle. Elizabeth's daughter, Chloe, was in middle school when she began demanding the latest iPhone, throwing a tantrum when her request was denied. Chloe even went so far as to call her mother cheap for not fulfilling her wish. That evening, Elizabeth had an epiphany. She realized that her constant indulgence of Chloe's every whim had created a sense of entitlement. Determined to change the dynamic, she decided to let go. Elizabeth returned the phone and told Chloe, "If you want the latest iPhone, you'll have to earn the money yourself. You can do chores around the house, save your allowance, or find other ways to contribute." She also reduced Chloe's weekly allowance, explaining that if she spent it all, she would need to learn to make up the difference. At first, Chloe resisted fiercely. She argued, threw tantrums, and accused her mother of being unfair. But Elizabeth stood her ground. Over time, Chloe began to adjust. She started doing extra chores and even offered to help neighbors with yard work during the summer to earn extra money. That summer, Chloe also tried her hand at selling lemonade, learning firsthand how difficult it was to earn even a small amount of money. The experience was transformative. After working long hours under the summer sun, Chloe began to see her parents' sacrifices in a new light. She realized how hard her mother worked to provide for the family, and her attitude shifted. She no longer wasted money on frivolous things and began to take pride in her ability to contribute. When it comes to family dynamics, financial independence can become one of the most complex issues in old age. This is particularly true when grown children impose unreasonable demands on their aging parents, as was the case for Diane Miller, a retired widow living alone in her later years. Diane had worked hard throughout her life, managing finances prudently and preparing for a comfortable retirement. However, her grown son, Michael Miller, had other plans for his mother's finances. Michael imposed 4 conditions on Diane, each one more difficult to accept than the last. The first 2 demands were feasible. He asked her to help pay for some of his expenses, and he requested assistance for his children's schooling. These were things Diane could manage. But when it came to the third request, Diane found herself in a moral dilemma. Michael wanted her to hand over all her savings. The money Diane had carefully set aside was meant to provide for her own needs in her senior years, to ensure that she could live independently without relying on others. Giving up those savings would leave her vulnerable, and she felt she couldn't comply with his demand. The fourth condition was the most difficult to accept. Michael asked Diane to sell her home in the countryside. He argued that with real estate prices rising, it would be better to sell the house and use the proceeds to purchase a new home for his children. He claimed that the house would eventually belong to him anyway, and selling it now would be beneficial for everyone. This request, however, felt like a betrayal to Diane. The house had been her sanctuary for many years, a place filled with memories, comfort, and the financial security she needed to live on her terms. Even though she could give her son some financial help, handing over everything, including her hard-earned savings and home, was too much for Diane to bear. Unable to comply with her son's unreasonable demands, Diane decided to take the proceeds from the sale of her home and the compensation money to move into a high-end nursing home. She made the decision to prioritize her own well-being, after years of trying to care for and provide for her family. Her children, now angry and resentful, felt entitled to a share of her savings and the home. They argued that the compensation money from the house sale and the home itself should be equally divided among them. Diane's children, all grown and living in different parts of the country, expressed their displeasure. Every few days, two of them would visit her at the nursing home, apologizing for their previous behavior and asking for forgiveness. During the holidays, they suggested bringing her back home, but Diane, having lived alone for nearly 15 years, had made her peace. They treated me poorly when I needed them most, she thought, so now, I have the right to treat them the same way. Despite their guilt-ridden apologies, Diane had learned to prioritize her peace. She no longer needed to worry about their opinions or try to please them. Her children's feelings were hurt, and they called her indifferent, cold-hearted, and selfish, claiming that she didn't care about them. But Diane had endured too much over the years, caring for her husband during his illness, working tirelessly to provide for her family, and watching as her children moved away and lived their own lives. Now, at the twilight of her years, Diane was ready to live the rest of her life on her terms. Legal and moral considerations. In many cultures, it is expected that children will care for their elderly parents. Traditional values often dictate that children should be responsible for their parents' well-being, especially when they are no longer able to care for themselves. In the United States, the law supports this expectation to a degree. While there may not be strict legal requirements for children to care for their parents, moral obligations and societal expectations often place a significant emotional and financial burden on the younger generation. Diane's situation, however, underscores a growing trend where adult children no longer feel obligated to care for their aging parents, and instead, impose unreasonable demands upon them. In her case, her son, Michael, who had grown up with everything provided for him, expected his mother to continue providing, even as she entered her later years. Diane never imagined that the son she had raised with love and care would impose such harsh conditions on her in her old age. She reflected on the years she had dedicated to her family. "I never thought that my only child, the one I worked so hard for, would treat me so coldly when I needed him the most," Diane shared. "When my husband was still alive, we never worried about needing help. We had stable jobs, a decent income, and a good life. After we retired, our pensions were enough for us to live comfortably. We always did our best to support Michael. Now, he has a family of his own, a house, a car, and yet, he still expects me to sacrifice everything I have for him." Diane and her late husband had always ensured that Michael had everything he needed growing up, even at the expense of their comforts. Yet, in his adulthood, Michael seemed to expect that his mother would continue to provide, even when it was no longer feasible for her. "My son enjoys a comfortable life, and we've always helped him as much as we could," Diane explained. "Yet now that I am older, he wants me to sell my home, give up my savings, and put myself in a position where I have nothing left. This isn't the way it should be." While Diane's children now regretted their past actions and sought to reconcile, she realized that the financial and emotional burden placed on her by her children was too great. She had learned that she could not depend on them for her well-being. In the end, Diane made the difficult but empowering decision to prioritize her health and happiness, no longer bound by the guilt or pressure of fulfilling unrealistic expectations. Life has its natural cycles: birth, aging, sickness, and death. At 64, Diane Harris faced an unexpected hardship: the sudden death of her husband, Robert Harris, due to a severe illness. Before his passing, Robert had worked hard to ensure a secure future for Diane. He left behind a substantial savings account of $400,000 and their family home. The couple had agreed that this money and the house would be reserved for Diane's retirement years, providing her with the security to live independently if necessary. Their plan was simple: if she didn't need to use it all, the remaining savings and property would be passed on to their only son, Ben. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. After Robert passed away, Diane kept the money for herself, determined to live independently. She knew that she might need it in case of unexpected expenses, especially as she grew older. Her son, Ben, however, was not pleased with this arrangement. He had his ideas about how his mother should spend her assets. Diane had always been a strong, independent woman, and for years she managed to live alone. However, 2 years ago, her sense of unease began to grow, not because she couldn't bear the solitude, but because she feared what might happen if she were to fall ill or pass away without anyone knowing. She thought of her neighbor, Alice Thompson, who had always been vibrant and active, yet one day, after not being seen for several days, it was discovered that Alice had died alone at home. She had fallen, and no one knew for days. This tragedy made Diane question her future. At first, Diane dismissed the thought of hiring a caregiver, knowing that the costs were prohibitively high. Standard caregivers in her area charged $1,500 a month, and with her modest pension of $700 a month, that was simply not feasible. Moving into a nursing home seemed like an option, but Diane was reluctant. She had a house and a son. Why should she give up her independence? After much thought, she concluded that living with Ben might be her best option. She recalled the saying, "Parents raise their children like the sky and the ocean. Children raise their parents like the sand and the waves." She realized that while it was natural for children to rely on their parents, parents should never have to depend on their children to the point of sacrificing their dignity. Still, Diane struggled with the idea of relying on Ben. Parents don't ask for much from their children, she thought. They don't want to burden them, but sometimes it seems like our children forget how much we have sacrificed for them. Balancing independence and responsibility. As Diane reflected on her situation, she couldn't ignore the truth that many parents face. Raising children is a lifelong responsibility, but it's not the parents' job to support their children endlessly into adulthood. Too much indulgence can deprive children of their ability to stand on their own. Dr. Susan Taylor, in her book The Art of Positive Parenting, argues that when parents give too much, they create habits of dependence in their children. This habit can lead to a lack of respect and an ungrateful attitude, where children take their parents' efforts for granted. This phenomenon was evident in the relationship between Diane and Ben. He had grown up with all his needs met, never having to worry about finances or taking on responsibilities. However, as he reached adulthood, Ben began to expect more from his mother, believing that she would always provide for him, even as he built his own family. His expectations were unreasonable, especially considering the sacrifices Diane had made to provide for him throughout his life. For example, when Ben asked Diane to give him access to all her savings, she could not comply. She explained that the money had been set aside to ensure her financial independence in her later years. If she handed over all of her savings, she would be left vulnerable, without a safety net for unforeseen circumstances. Diane could afford to give Ben some money, around $2,000 each month, but she could not provide everything he asked for. Even though Ben reassured her that the money would be safe with him and that she could always take it back when needed, the idea of asking for money, as a parent, felt wrong to Diane. Ben also asked his mother to sell the house she had lived in for over 30 years. He claimed that the real estate market was booming, and the house could be sold for a good price, which would provide funds to purchase a larger home for his children. He argued that eventually, the house would pass on to him anyway, so it would be better to sell it now and benefit from the sale. For Diane, however, the house represented more than just a financial asset. It was a sanctuary, a place filled with memories of her late husband. To part with it was unthinkable, and she could not agree to his request. Taking control of her future. Unable to meet all of Ben's demands, Diane decided to take the proceeds from the sale of her house and move into a high-end retirement community. It was a difficult decision, but one that gave her the peace of mind she needed. Diane knew her children were angry. Ben and his siblings felt entitled to a share of her assets, and they were upset when Diane refused to divide the money and property among them. They came to visit her frequently, asking for forgiveness and pleading with her to return home. But Diane had made up her mind. She was no longer willing to sacrifice her independence for the sake of pleasing her children. They treated me with disrespect for years, and now I'm supposed to let them control my life? Diane thought. No, I've lived alone for too long, and I've endured enough. Now, I will enjoy my remaining years in peace, without worrying about their expectations or guilt. Ben and the others tried to convince her to come back, but Diane stood firm. I'm done living in guilt, she thought. I gave everything to raise them, and now they must understand that I am entitled to live the way I choose. The rights and responsibilities of parents. In American society, as in many other cultures, there is an unspoken expectation that children will care for their parents in their old age. While no law obligates children to support their elderly parents, many feel a moral duty to do so. However, as Diane's story illustrates, that duty is often misunderstood or ignored. Parents like Diane spend their entire lives providing for their children, only to find that as they age, their children demand more from them than they can reasonably give. The emotional and financial burdens placed on parents can be overwhelming, especially when children fail to respect their parents' need for independence. Diane's situation highlights a common dilemma. While parents are expected to help their children, there should be a balance. Children should not view their parents as perpetual providers, nor should they expect to be financially supported well into adulthood. Similarly, parents should not feel compelled to give everything away for the sake of their children's comfort. As Diane wisely decided, taking care of herself and securing her future was her right and responsibility, even if it meant not fulfilling her children's every wish. Diane Miller made the difficult decision to move into a luxury retirement community after selling her home and using the proceeds to secure her future. She knew that her 4 children were angry at her decision, especially since they believed the sale of the house and the compensation funds should be equally divided among them. Diane tried to explain that after she married Robert, they had both worked hard to build a life together. As the years passed, all her children moved out and started their own lives, leaving their childhood home behind. Diane had long since come to terms with the fact that she was responsible for her well-being, especially now that she was on her own. The anger from her children was palpable. Every few days, 2 of them would visit Diane in the nursing home, offering apologies and begging her to come back home. They wanted her to forgive them and end the distance that had grown between them. However, Diane stood firm in her decision, feeling no obligation to cater to their wishes anymore. They treated me harshly for years, Diane thought. Now, it's my turn to take control of my life and make the choices that are best for me. Her children tried to justify their behavior, calling her cold-hearted and accusing her of selfishness for wanting to live independently. Yet, Diane had already endured the emotional burden of raising 4 children alone for many years and had lived without their support for almost 15 years. She was tired of being made to feel guilty for prioritizing herself. Her only wish now was to enjoy her remaining years peacefully and without worry. A mother's dilemma, the burden of responsibility. In traditional American culture, there is an expectation that children will care for their parents as they age. This idea has been reinforced over time by moral values and even, in some states, legal obligations. The reality, however, can often be different. Diane's situation highlighted how many grown children feel entitled to their parents' resources without offering the support their parents might need. It also highlighted the complexities of the parent-child relationship when financial expectations become entangled with emotional needs. The story of Diane's life was a testament to the sacrifices her parents made. She had been a devoted mother, giving everything she could to raise her children, ensuring they had everything they needed, from the best education to comfortable living. But now that she was older, her children were no longer interested in helping her as she had helped them. The breaking point. Diane's reflection on her future. As the years went on, Diane continued to reflect on her relationship with her children. She had agreed with her late husband, Robert, that they would use their savings and home for their retirement, and that if either of them passed, the remaining assets would be left to their son, Ben. But after Robert's sudden death, Diane began to worry about her independence. She had worked hard her entire life to provide for her family, and now it was her time to care for herself. Diane's son, Ben, whom she had raised with love and sacrifices, saw the situation differently. Ben expected Diane to hand over her savings without hesitation, arguing that his financial needs were greater than hers. He even asked her to sell her family home and put the money towards his children's future. He justified this request by claiming that real estate prices were rising and that the house would eventually belong to him anyway. Despite this reasoning, Diane refused to comply. The house represented years of memories with Robert, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing it to appease her son. At 64, Diane's worries deepened when she heard about her neighbor, Carol Thompson, who had always been active and independent, yet had passed away alone in her home. Carol's body wasn't discovered until 3 days later, and this tragic event made Diane reconsider her future. She feared that if she became ill, no one would be around to help or even check on her. Although she considered hiring a caregiver, the high costs were out of her reach, and moving into a nursing home felt like a compromise she wasn't ready to make. Ultimately, she decided that living with her son seemed like the safest option. The importance of saving and preparing for old age. Diane's life experience had taught her that the key to peace of mind in old age was financial independence. Parents are expected to help their children, but the relationship can become one-sided if children expect to continually rely on their parents. Diane had spent years caring for her children, but now, as she faced the reality of aging, she understood that taking control of her finances and future was the best way to ensure she wouldn't become a burden on anyone. This realization was reinforced by a conversation with her longtime friend, Janet, who had recently retired. Janet had always been there for Diane during tough times, and now, Janet was offering her valuable advice. "Diane, you've always given everything for your children, but when you reach my age, you'll realize how important it is to have your savings. The more you give, the more they take. You need to start saving now and not feel guilty about it. It's not selfish to take care of yourself first." If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Janet's words struck a chord with Diane. She had always been willing to help her children, but now it was time to prioritize herself. She knew that if she kept helping them, they would simply take it for granted and would no longer feel responsible for her care when she needed it most. Diane decided to stop giving, to save her pension for herself, and to ensure that she would never be in a situation where she would rely on anyone but herself. The wake-up call. A moment of realization. It wasn't until Diane's children asked for substantial sums of money that she realized how deep their expectations had become. Her son, Ben, asked for $100,000 to buy a house for his children, claiming that if she didn't help, they would be in financial ruin. Diane, however, saw the request for what it was. Another demand that would only lead to more dependence and further strain their relationship. Diane had always tried to provide for her children, but now she saw the importance of maintaining her financial security. Rather than giving away the money that was meant to provide for her care, she chose to keep it. She would no longer enable their expectations of endless support. "If they want my help, they will have to earn it themselves. I've done enough," she thought. Diane's decision to stop giving to her children was painful, but it also brought a sense of clarity. She was ready to face her final years without the emotional and financial burden of constantly fulfilling her children's demands. At that point in her life, Diane Miller had saved up $600,000. She sat her children down and firmly stated, "This money is for my old age. I can't give it to you. You've all worked for many years, and I'm sure you've saved some money yourself. As for marriage and your lives, you must handle it yourselves. You can't rely on your parents. If you do, you will become dependent and live off of me." Her words were met with silence, and her children were left stunned and angry. They had always seen Diane as the mother who would do anything for them, always indulging them and willing to provide for their needs. Now, they felt betrayed by her decision to put her financial security first. They tried to convince her to help, promising that they would take care of her in the future, but Diane, feeling the weight of their intentions, realized their true motive. They were only after her money. She was fortunate that she had been quietly saving all her pension money. If she hadn't, she would have been left destitute later in life. "I don't need your help now," she thought. "I have prepared for my own future. I will no longer help you." This decision was a painful one, but Diane knew it was necessary to ensure her own independence. As her children continued to struggle with their finances, they eventually stopped asking for her help. After they got married, they became busy with their own lives, and the visits to Diane became rare. Diane felt a bittersweet sense of relief as time went on. Her children had matured and were becoming independent. A sudden loss and the harsh reality. Diane had always believed that her husband, Robert, would be by her side forever. But life had its plans. At 70, Robert was diagnosed with cancer. The treatment drained their savings, and Diane had to sell their home to cover medical expenses. Despite her best efforts, Robert's condition deteriorated, and he passed away, leaving Diane devastated. During this difficult time, Diane's children didn't come to visit her. Despite knowing that their mother was sick, they chose to stay away. Diane, feeling abandoned and angry, realized that her relationship with her children had deteriorated beyond repair. She had spent years raising them, providing for them, and now in her greatest time of need, they refused to show any support. She had no choice but to hire a caregiver to take care of her in her weakened state. The cost of the caregiver and medical treatment left her with almost nothing. Diane's savings, which she had spent decades building, were now gone, and she had to rely solely on her modest pension to get by. Every day felt like a struggle. Even though she had saved for this moment, her pension was insufficient to cover her needs. The harsh realization, a mother's regret. As the days passed, Diane grew more lonely and frustrated. She had thought that preparing for old age by saving money would give her peace of mind, but it hadn't worked out as she had hoped. Her children no longer saw her as their mother, but as a stranger, and they had no interest in visiting her. At times, Diane wished for a simple reunion meal with her children, but they never came. Deep down, she knew that they no longer saw her as someone they needed to care for. The decision to save money for her old age, which had seemed so logical at the time, now felt like her greatest mistake. Her health continued to decline, and medical expenses mounted. Every time Diane went to the hospital, she had to pay $10,000, which was more than her pension could handle. Reluctantly, she reached out to her children, hoping for some help. But their response was cold and dismissive. "When we needed help, you didn't help us," her son, Ben, said. "Now you need help, but we can't help you. You saved money to prepare for old age. You shouldn't rely on us." At that moment, Diane's heart broke. She realized that her saving for the future had pushed her children away, and now she had no one to turn to. They had grown resentful of her actions, and Diane knew that she had lost her chance to ever be truly supported by them again. The importance of moderation in parenting. Diane reflected on her life and realized that, in her efforts to prepare for old age, she had pushed her children away. Her decision to save money and not help them when they asked had resulted in a complete breakdown of their relationship. Now, she wished she had been more balanced, that she had given her children the support they needed while still ensuring that her future was secure. Parents should be there to support their children, not to replace their responsibility, Diane thought. Children need to understand that it's their responsibility to take care of themselves, not to rely entirely on their parents for everything. Parents can support, but they cannot shoulder all the burden. When Diane had heard a friend's advice to save for old age, she had thought it was the wisest decision she could make. However, now she understood that saving money for herself while refusing to help her children when they needed it had caused irreparable damage. She now understood that parenting required balance. Too much sacrifice for others without caring for your own needs only leads to resentment and isolation. A surprise call. The realization. One day, Diane's phone rang, and the voice on the other end sent chills down her spine. It was her son, Ben. After all these years, he was finally reaching out. "I miss you, Mom. Let's have a family meal together." His voice sounded so different from the coldness she had come to expect from him. It was almost as if their years of estrangement had never happened. But just as Diane was about to respond, she received a text message from her granddaughter, Lily. "Don't agree to meet him, Grandma. He's just asking because your house is being evicted." Diane's heart sank. The years of emotional distance between them were now linked to financial motives. The walls that had divided them were suddenly exposed. Ben's call, which had felt like a moment of reconciliation, was now tainted by the realization that his intentions were not as pure as they had seemed. Diane felt as though she were falling into an abyss of confusion and sorrow. At that moment, Diane knew that her decision to prepare for her old age by saving had cost her the chance of ever having a meaningful relationship with her children again. The years of love, sacrifice, and care she had poured into them had been overshadowed by her attempt to control her future. "As a child, I was always the recipient of my family's love. Whenever there was something tasty, my brothers and sisters would always make sure I had the first share. Even during the holidays, when our family could barely afford to buy anything extra, I was the one who got to wear the new clothes first. Growing up in a family full of nurturing care, I lived a simple, happy, and innocent life. When it was time for me to start school, my parents and siblings supported me wholeheartedly. They worked tirelessly, day and night, just to ensure I had enough food and money for my education. I was a good student, obedient and diligent, always striving to be the best in class. Time flew by, and before I knew it, I graduated from high school and passed the entrance exam for secondary school. At this new school, I met Ryan Miller, the father of my son, Tyler. I'll never forget the first time we met. It was a beautiful, sunny day, and I accidentally bumped into him outside the library. My books flew everywhere, and without hesitation, he rushed to help me, smiling warmly as he handed them back. From that day on, we would often see each other at school. Ryan began inviting me to study together at the library, and we would take walks under the shade of the trees in the schoolyard. He was thoughtful and kind, and always seemed to appear when I needed him most. I still vividly remember the time I was feeling sick. Despite it being class hours, he ran over to care for me, buying medicine and even making porridge for me to eat. His kindness moved me deeply, and before long, I found myself falling in love with him. At 20, I decided to marry Ryan. However, when I shared my plans with my parents, their response was far from supportive. My father, concerned about my future, warned me. "Honey, Ryan's family background isn't good. His father has a history of abuse, and he takes his child away from his mother. I'm afraid you'll suffer, and your mother will too." My father's words filled me with doubt. My mother, looking worried, said, "Marriage isn't a decision to take lightly. You need to think carefully about this." But at that age, I was too naive to understand their concerns. I thought love could overcome anything. I assured my parents, "Ryan isn't like that. He treats me with nothing but kindness. I believe in him." Tensions in our house escalated as my parents, concerned for my well-being, tried to discourage me from going ahead with the marriage. I was too headstrong to listen. After each argument, I would retreat to my room, crying, but resolute in my decision to marry Ryan. Eventually, after many tears and heated discussions, my father said, "If you're determined to marry him, don't come crying to us later if you regret it." With that, my parents reluctantly gave their approval, though their concern was palpable. In 1990, Ryan and I were married. Our wedding was simple, reflective of the modest rural area where we lived. There were no grand banquets or lavish gowns, just the warm blessings of our family and friends. I wore a red dress, my face radiant with a smile that believed this was the start of a new, beautiful chapter. Little did I know, it was only the beginning of a long, painful journey. At first, our married life was harmonious. Ryan still treated me with kindness, and we worked together to build a small home and a brighter future. But as time passed, things began to change. Ryan's temperament grew increasingly irritable. He would snap at me over the smallest things. One evening, I cooked the rice a little later than usual, and he angrily shouted, "What are you doing, you useless woman? Even the cooking is a struggle for you." I stood there, my heart breaking as tears streamed down my face. This was not the man who had once been so kind and loving. I started to remember my parents' warnings. Late at night, I would cry in silence, regretting not listening to them. But then, I would console myself, telling myself that maybe he was just under pressure at work and things would get better. I made excuses for him, hoping to hold on to a marriage that was slowly falling apart. Day by day, I lived in torment. 2 years later, we had our son, Tyler. His birth felt like a glimmer of hope for our troubled marriage. I thought that perhaps having a child would bring us closer together. For a short time, things improved. Ryan tried harder to control his temper. But the peace was short-lived. His anger intensified, and soon, the physical abuse started. One night, a storm raged outside. The wind howled, and rain poured down in sheets. Tyler, only 10 years old, was burning with fever. His face was flushed, and he cried out in pain from exhaustion. I desperately wanted to take him to the hospital, but Ryan calmly said, "No, we'll wait till morning." If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment below to let me know that you are still here with me. I was shocked by his coldness. I couldn't understand how he could remain so calm while our son was suffering. That night, I held Tyler in my arms, feeling helpless. I realized that the man I had trusted with my life was not the same person I had once fallen in love with. That night, I had argued with Ryan, and the tension between us had reached a breaking point. I was so worried about our son, Tyler, who was burning with fever. Ryan insisted that it wasn't necessary to take him to the hospital, dismissing my concerns. The more I tried to reason with him, the angrier he became. In his rage, he grabbed a cigarette from the table and hurled it at me. The impact was sudden, and I couldn't dodge in time. The pain was overwhelming, and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed, my body covered in bruises. Tyler was sitting by my side, tears streaming down his face. Seeing him cry, my heart shattered. At that moment, I knew I couldn't continue living this way. Not for my sake, and not for Tyler's. I had to leave. But leaving wasn't going to be easy. Ryan was determined not to let me go. He thought I was just making threats. Maybe he was afraid that a divorce would ruin his image, or maybe it was just his control over me that he was unwilling to let go. Ryan's threats were endless. He said he would hurt my family, making sure I could never live in peace. Despite his intimidation, I felt an undeniable need to leave, to escape this hellish life for good. In my most desperate moment, help came from an unlikely source. My neighbors, Mark and Tony, were appalled when they learned of my situation. Mark had always been a kind and generous person, and Tony, a strong, youthful man, dared to take action. They gathered a group of villagers to confront Ryan. Together, they went to our house and demanded that Ryan let me go. They condemned his behavior and made it clear that I was no longer going to tolerate the abuse. Faced with the pressure, Ryan reluctantly agreed to the divorce. But then, the fight wasn't over. Ryan's parents stepped in, determined not to let me take Tyler with me. They loved their grandson deeply and wanted to keep him to maintain control over me. They spread lies about me in front of Tyler, painting me as a selfish mother who was abandoning him. Tyler, still so young, didn't understand the complexities of the situation. He was manipulated, looking at me with fear and suspicion, as if I had betrayed him. His words cut through me like 1,000 knives. "Mom doesn't need me anymore." I stood there, frozen, my heart breaking. I wanted to explain, to tell him that I loved him more than anything, but I knew it would do no good. My father, hearing about the situation, advised me, "Let Tyler stay with his grandparents for now. Take care of yourself, and when you're stable, you can bring him back later." I didn't want to listen, but I had to. My father's words were rooted in love, and deep down, I knew he was right. I wasn't in a position to give Tyler the life he deserved. So, with a heavy heart, I accepted it. After the divorce, I moved to a new city with my siblings to start fresh. Life wasn't easy. We lived in cramped, run-down boarding rooms, working long hours at factory jobs. The physical exhaustion took a toll on me, but I kept going. The trauma of my marriage haunted me every day, and the thought of falling into another tragedy kept me from trusting anyone. I chose to live alone, focusing all my energy on work. Even though I was struggling, I never stopped sending money to support Tyler. Every month, I sent what I could, making sure he had enough for food and school. But every time I tried to visit him, his grandparents blocked me. It was clear they didn't want Tyler to remember me, or to have any connection with his mother. I recall one time when I secretly returned to the village to see him. When Tyler saw me, his face twisted with anger. He shouted, "Mom, go away. I don't want to see you. You're ugly." I stood there, motionless, tears flowing down my face. I didn't understand why my son was treating me this way. But I knew deep down that it was because his grandparents had poisoned his mind with lies about me. Despite the pain, I refused to give up. I told myself, I am his mother. I have to keep trying. One day, he'll understand. As the years passed, Tyler grew older, and I never stopped supporting him. When he went to college, I saved every penny to make sure he could afford his tuition. I worked harder than ever, hoping that he would forgive me and understand why I had to leave. But when Tyler got married, I was not invited to the wedding. I had saved up a significant amount to contribute, but they never gave me the chance. I stood from a distance, watching my son from afar, sending him my blessings, but my heart was heavy with resentment. 5 years ago, I got a call from Tyler. He was calling to tell me that he had become a father. At that moment, I felt a mix of emotions. Joy, because I thought this could be my chance to rebuild our relationship, but also fear, knowing the pain that had come before. Would I be hurt again? But my maternal love couldn't be suppressed. I packed my bags and went to visit Tyler's family. I hoped that this time, things would be different. I threw myself into caring for my new grandchild, waking up early every morning to prepare breakfast and taking care of the child. I poured all my love into him, hoping that somehow my son would see and understand the depth of my love for him. Hoping to make up for the years of distance and lack of affection between me and my son, I threw myself into caring for my grandchild, trying to make amends in my way. But the outcome was nothing short of bitter. Min-jung seemed completely indifferent to my presence. Not only did he not thank me for helping, but he also snapped at me over the smallest things. I remember one particular day when my grandchild fell and started crying. I rushed to pick him up, trying to comfort him, but when Min-jung came home and saw his son in tears, without a word of concern, he shouted, "How could you let my son fall like that?" I stood there, humiliated and defeated, feeling as though everything I had done for this family was being thrown back in my face. His harsh words and his aggression all brought back memories of his father. After so many years, the invisible wall between my son and me was still there, unbreachable, and it hurt. I quietly retreated to my room, tears flowing freely as I thought about all the sacrifices I had made over the years, only to be met with this coldness. I felt so pathetic, so utterly laughable. I had spent my youth, my energy, and my love on this family, and yet it seemed to mean nothing. But as time passed, I found solace in a different place. My daughter, who had been supportive all these years, and my obedient grandchild, brought me comfort. If I hadn't reclaimed the house that day, if I had endured my son-in-law's behavior, I would have spent my later years in the coldness and torment of their family. I would have lost my dignity, lost my family, and lost myself. I am truly fortunate that I made the decision I did. My life may not be filled with wealth or luxury, but it has been meaningful. I've learned to be strong and independent, something I am proud of. And though my heart still aches, I trust that time will heal all wounds. To continue the story, I want to share another chapter from my life, one that will show you how deep the cuts can go, even when you try to do what's right. A hard-fought victory for dignity. 15 years ago, I struggled to raise my grandchild, but despite everything, my son-in-law was clear about his stance. Taking care of me in my old age had nothing to do with him. I couldn't hold back the hurt, questioning his conscience. Where is your conscience? After all the sacrifices I've made for your family, this is how you repay me. My son-in-law had always promised me that he would take care of me. Yet, he seemed to forget those promises once he got what he wanted. When I insisted on reclaiming the house from him, he scoffed, saying, "The house belongs to me. The paperwork is clear. You have no right to claim it." This battle dragged on. My son-in-law filed a lawsuit against me, wanting to force me out of the house. He advised me to prepare myself mentally for the fight that lay ahead. My daughter, ashamed of how things had turned out, apologized to me for enabling her husband. Despite her regret, I reassured her, telling her that from now on, we would rely on each other. On the day of the court hearing, I stood strong. As a witness, I recounted my son-in-law's behavior, the way he had taken possession of the house, and his harsh words toward me. His lawyer argued that the house had been bought by him and my daughter, but the judge pressed him on the details. The judge asked him, "Did you purchase this house?" He replied quickly, "My wife and I bought it together." But when the judge asked, "Is your wife's name on the property title?" he fell silent. The judge then ruled that the house belonged to me and that my son-in-law's family had 10 days to vacate. They appealed, but the ruling stood firm. The house was returned to me, and I could finally reclaim my dignity. This wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting my rights and standing up for myself. This experience taught me that no matter the family bonds, when money is involved, things can quickly unravel. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 5 below to let me know that you are still here with me. I believe that true family bonds cannot be swayed by material things or selfishness. Even though my daughter had cut off contact with me after everything that happened, believing I was too cold and indifferent, I could understand her feelings. But I couldn't overlook the betrayal from my son-in-law. Over time, I allowed myself to heal. I slowly got involved in social activities and met new people who brought light back into my life. One day, while walking through the park, I unexpectedly bumped into my son-in-law. He looked completely different, disheveled, his hair and beard untidy. The sight of me made him rush over, and with a look of desperation, he said, "Mother, I was wrong. Please forgive me for the sake of my grandchild." He tried to express remorse, but I couldn't bring myself to soften. I responded coldly, no, without another word. I turned and walked away, heading back to my home. Inside, I gazed at the picture of my daughter hanging on the wall. A deep sorrow filled my heart, a longing for her to return, to come back to the woman I knew she could be. Just as I was lost in thought, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my daughter standing there, tears in her eyes. She rushed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mother, I was wrong. I shouldn't have cut you off. It's all my fault." I held her close, stroking her hair, and whispered, "No, I don't blame you. I know you were misled by him. But now, you've seen his true face." With determination, my daughter promised she would never return to her old husband and would stay by my side, caring for me. I smiled, the weight in my chest lifting as I finally felt the warmth of her presence again. After all we had been through, I knew that as long as we remained united, life would be good. From that moment on, our lives began to change. Every day, I made breakfast for my daughter and saw her off to work with a heart full of love. In the evenings, we would cook together, chatting and sharing stories about our day. Weekends were spent walking together, enjoying each other's company. My daughter enrolled me in a senior modeling club, and I met many wonderful people. I realized that even in old age, life could still be full of color and joy. Time seemed to fly by, and before I knew it, my grandchild was entering university. He was kind and respectful, looking at me with the same loving gaze that I once saw in his mother when she was young. At that moment, I knew that despite all the pain and hardship, family bonds had been restored, and life was beautiful once again. As we come to the end of this journey, I hope you've gained valuable insights into the complexities of family dynamics, forgiveness, and the importance of setting boundaries. From the struggles of balancing love with independence to the power of healing, there's so much we can learn from these stories. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What have you learned so far? Is there one piece of wisdom that stood out to you, something that you'll carry with you into your own life? Please share in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave your comments, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring more stories like this to inspire and connect with people just like you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.